Good afternoon, everyone. Today, a treat. I have with me Bob Kudla, tradelikeagenius.com. This is our third year to get together to discuss crop losses and things, grand solar minimum, markets, grains. This is an update that most people have been waiting for, and I'm so happy it's the end of the year now so we can get the wrap up. We've had the early season blizzards, the propane shortages in the Midwest, civil unrest in 21 different countries across the planet, exports in India of onions causing civil unrest, and everywhere you look, it's about the food, it's about the food, it's about the economy, the trade of food for the next economy, contractions, and everywhere except the United States is looking pretty, well, teetering on an edge right now. The U.S. is a bubble in itself, how well it's doing, but when you look out at the greater landscape in the world, we start to see a lot of things with food price increases and people not very happy about that. TradeLikeAGenius.com. If you've never traded before and want to take advantage of these types of profits every day in the market, I urge you to sign up for one of many Trade Genius online educational courses. Right now through Black Friday, you can save 50% off their bundled specials. Use the promo code Black Friday at TradeLikeAGenius.com. Tell them Adapt 2030 sent you. Crypto, options, ETFs, and the traditional markets. And on to the interview with Bob Kudla from TradeLikeAGenius.com. It's been, 3.5 years since we first started chatting. So going back to the beginning, seems like such a distant, long time ago, 3.5 years. But when we're kids, it seems like, just yesterday, but it seems like yesterday in time. But when we look back and we try to pin events down, it seems like ages ago, eons ago, 3.5, 4 years. Oh, wow, that was like last century almost,
Well, hey, it's great to see you, Dave. It is pretty funny because you and I first talked because I started trading. For people of background, I've been trading for years and years and years, and I had a private trading group where I wasn't doing any of this stuff. I just had a group of people we traded with, and the marketing's still good. Instead of Trade Like a Genius, we were investor masterminds. You gotta love the marketing pitch. But when I was going to take this public, the reason why I did it was after a conversation you and I had. I found you on the internet, and you were just you were like John the Baptist is crying out in the wilderness. This was 2015, and you're saying, hey guys, starting 2017, 2018, 2019, this thing's just going to come up on everybody like a thief in the night. And we were always projecting forward. Remember, you say, hey, Bob, 2 years this is going to happen. Bob, next year this is going to happen. Now we're looking backwards, Dave. It's happened. And it is coming like a railroad going downhill with no brakes. I mean, seriously, Canada's offline. The entire country of Canada, I think at one point in the last 30 days was under snow. Their barley crop, their canola crop, their wheat crop. And I just spent time in the in Hawaii and doing some training over there. And a lot of the people that are on vacation there are from Canada, primarily from BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan. And they just said it's just been amazingly cold. I mean, amazingly cold summer, amazingly cold fall, early winter, and it just basically shut it down. And we talked about this before. Canada goes offline. Canada is one of what I call the surplus belt for grain, and what's been carrying the ball for the last couple of years is as we transitioned, the Ukraine-Russian belt became ideal. And now that's slipping past peak too. And so Russia can't provide the surplus anymore. Australia had to import wheat for the first time, I think, ever. And what's carrying that now is because Brazil expanded their grain production regions. But as you know, Brazil went offline with freezes. They never get freezes in the upland in Brazil, but they got it this year. And what I tell people is, I said, it's not necessarily the absolute cold or the absolute heat. It's the wave function of the jet stream that dips farther than what these crops are used to seeing and tags them before they can be harvested. And that's what caused the problem. I mean, and that's what's caused the problem in the U.S. this year. And look at the Midwest. I mean, we're getting snow. I think they got this freeze last 2 weeks was all the way down into Mexico. We had 30 below normal temperatures in Baja, Mexico. And right now, I'm talking to you. Today is Tuesday, the 19th. Not sure when we're going to throw this bad boy on, but we're having a tropical storm coming out of Baja that's falling apart, meaning a northern winter storm in November. And this is the kind of stuff that you expect, is these extremes. And guess where it's ending up? Right over my house in Southern California. We're going to get an inch plus of rain in Southern California next 2 days. And then a week later, we're going to get another storm. And then 2 weeks later, we're going to get another storm. And this was not predicted by the experts out there. They said, hey, we're going cold, we're going dry, expect droughts, and we'll start filling up the reservoirs again. And so this gets people all unnerved because the USDA, where I follow the grains in the US, are always saying bumper crop, bumper crop, bumper crop, and then they get caught off guard. And the crops might be good, but you and I talked about this before. The wheat might be of high quantity, but the quality is just atrocious. In fact, it's getting to the point where they can't even feed it to the cattle. It's just getting the moisture is causing it to rust. And don't get me started on China. People always say, "Oh, is the U.S. going to take China down?" I'm like, China's going to take China down. They are right now. We're worried in the U.S. that Smithfield Foods changed their entire production to basically slaughtering whole hogs, cutting them into thirds, freezing them, and putting them on railroad cars heading to China. And the CEO of Smithfield Foods says, hey, this can affect the supply of pork in the United States. Can you imagine with the heightened sense of anger right now and the tension with China that the American people find out that the Chinese are shipping basically our entire pig, harvested hog population over to China, and we'll start seeing 2, 3, 4x price of pork. So, I mean, all these things are coming at us here. The politics affect the economics, and the economics are affected by the grand solar minimum. I'm telling people that what's going to end the Fed is going to be the grand solar minimum. People look at me like, huh? I said, because they can't print food. And once food prices get too expensive, anybody that's using the dollar, Dave, is they're not going to be able to handle it because the dollar is going to keep getting stronger, not because we're the best, it's that we're the best left. And people that aren't using the dollar, like China, look, what is it? You follow this better than I do. In China, 75%, 100% food inflation on pig.
171% in the last 6 months.
Yeah, just absolutely astounding.
That's almost doubling in 6 months in the price of that staple. And remember, pork is such an integral part of the society. Like if you don't have it at your dinner table in a holiday time, that you have just lost all reputation. As if you're living on a dirt floored shack with like a bare bulb hanging out from the old 20-watt bulb or something. That brings you down to that level of people looking at you in your mind if you don't have pork on the table because you couldn't afford it. Now there's fist fights happening in the supermarkets because the stores that do have available pork, the actual people are fist fighting to pay for it because they need it that badly. It's insane what's going on there.
I saw that, and for people that listening, that may know you, is that you're very familiar with the Asian culture and you understand it completely. You've been immersed in it for years. It's like in the U.S. that you can't have prime rib or turkey or ham for the holidays, and you have to eat like chicken or even go vegetarian. It's just like it's that important, and we're going to be at that point. When grain prices get too high, Dave, they basically slaughter the animals, okay, and they reduce the herds. So in the beginning, you get a reduction in the price and the cost of the meats, but then it becomes extremely expensive. And yesterday, I had a friend over. We were watching football, and they're from Minnesota. They're dairy farmers, and he said, "Bob, that's not the only problem we have with the farming. Is that you can't get people to work the farms either anymore. So you're starting to have supply issues from a not growing it perspective because they can't, and also at the same time you're not going to be able to get the crop out of the ground. And what for people to understand is that farmers in the U.S. we're a little bit lucky because we're deep north and south. But what happens is you start swapping grains from higher quality to lower quality. You know, you go from corn to wheat. You know, if you can't get the wheat in the ground, maybe soybeans. If you can't get that, you're to barley. You know, and you know, and it's ironic. You know, those who are Christian, when if you read the Bible, they said, you know, it gets to a point where people can't afford the oil and the wheat, and they only have enough money to be able to buy barley. This is the context behind it, because barley is the cheapest, fastest growing of all the grains, and that's what Canada is going to be. Canada's going to be the barley capital of the world, because they're not going to be able to have enough time to grow the higher rated grains or oils.
Yeah, and you know, one thing there, the hard red winter wheat is at 110-year low planting for acreage in the U.S., and now they're saying that the farmers are going to switch over to sorghum. I'm saying, yeah, there's a big difference. I'm saying that the availability of our weather to sustain hard red winter wheat is no longer there. And to avoid panic on the markets or actually letting the cat out of the bag, they're starting to tell people that they're going to switch these grains. But, you know, since we first started talking a couple of years ago, I was saying that they're going to come in with substitute grains, and they're going to start shifting the grow zones, and the actual latitudes where grains can grow will be switched in the beginning where they can. And I can't believe it's already here already where they're doing a full switch. I mean, these farmers are at 110-year low planting acreage wise, more than a century. We're going to shrink down to that 110 years ago mark, and they're going to plant the rest of it with sorghum. To the same acreage that we have today. That's insane. What's going on? Why can't they grow the hard red winter wheat? And look at the protein content, terrible. And, you know, since you put off a few things they're talking about countries, you know, Canada, to give people an indication of how much is lost in the fields in Canada, 5 million acres this year. 5 million acres is going to go unharvested because it's under snow. It froze solid completely. It was after the first, second, now the third blizzard. And those temperatures were below 0 Fahrenheit up there. And also here in the United States, we receive below 0 Fahrenheit temperatures in the Northeast. So how far can it keep going up? And then the acreage, the yields, if you're looking at Argentina, here's a statistic. I just did a video yesterday about Argentina. I did a wheat wrap up. The excellent wheat in Argentina is 0.4% this year compared to 9% last year. 0.4% this year is excellent quality. And then if you look over what is considered good quality, 14% this year compared to 40% last year. So do the math on that. Where is in the bad now? How much is in the terrible grains, or like you're talking about, barely able to use for animal food? And now the ethanol producers are complaining that there's not enough sugars inside the grains they're using, because when the plants get really cold, when they're taking up the stalk and they're trying to convert that in the kernels up to sugar, it just stops the process when it gets too cold. So you're getting these incredibly small kernels of both corn and wheat. And the ethanol producers are like, we actually have to have more throughput to equal the same amount of output. So they need more tonnage in, because what they're getting as a base stock product is not nearly remotely quality enough even to make ethanol. That's even scarier. Animal feed is one thing, human consumption is another. But when it comes down to the point where the food is so poor quality that ethanol producers are struggling to keep their supply chains full because they have to use a percentage over to equal, it's getting into la-la land now. And I can't believe that more people aren't talking about this, but it's the same MO. USDA, oh, we're having great crops. They're 5 months behind on their forecasts or their information releases anyway. Private crop forecasters is where we need to go. Now, it's a sad day when the American government has totally dropped the ball on agriculture, where we need to go to private grain tours and social media to get the true state of what's happening in the fields versus what the government statistics are releasing.
Yeah, and Dave, just so people know, is that is by design. You know, we as traders, we've known for quite some time that these government agencies are the tools of the people who sponsor them. So, when you trade gold and silver, it's the banks that are the customer, right? So they're always looking to suppress gold and silver prices because that affects the ability from the government to do Ponzi. Well, the same thing happens on the food side. They're always suppressing the price of food through rosy acreage and production because their customer is ADM and the banks. And if they can gain control over the farmer and force the farmer to sell when they don't want to sell, or force the farmer to get into the futures market and actually drive the price down, that's what they want. I mean, the whole movie, The Wizard of Oz, was designed around the whole thing. You know, the Wicked Witch of the East were the New York bankers. The Wicked Witch of the North was the Chicago futures traders. People don't realize this is way back when, you know, and the reason why it was the gold and the silver and the rubies is that was hard currency. And so this has been a battle we've been fighting forever. So, well, I listen to the USDA because I know they're going to jam the corn and wheat and soybean prices in the future market. But other than that, you know, they're really worthless. And thank God for social media. You know, social media and the whole digital blockchain will eventually, when I think we get on the other side of this nightmare that we're going to go through this next decade, is going to replace all these government agencies. Because what's going to happen is, you know, you listen to the CEO of First Majestic Silver. He's like, I don't know why I need a silver exchange in New York when I can get together with all the other silver producers and say, we'll create our own market using blockchain, and you can't participate unless you are a buyer or seller of silver and actually will take possession instead of selling these false contracts. It's called naked shorting in the business, where you can just overwhelm, you know, a producer with fake contracts to force the price down, even though that's not the market price. And what's so frustrating from our end is now you're hearing around the world, we need socialism because capitalism doesn't work. Well, we don't have capitalism when a bank or a hedge fund or a government agency can basically create contracts out of thin air and force a price down. That's not price discovery. That's some sort of fascism that we're dealing with right now. But at some point, what happens, David, my point is that this suppression is like a beach ball being pushed down. And when they lose control, this thing just rockets. And excuse me a second. And this is what happened with the platinum palladium market last year. Russia controls the supply. And we annoyed them somewhere, either Britain did or United States did with some of our goofy sanctions that we try to put on all the time, is that they withheld it from the market. Well, all the London exchange that were shorting the market had to come up with physical. Well, the price doubled. Can you imagine if the farmers decided that they're not going to do that and they're going to hold food off the markets? You know, like the farmers did in Argentina to Kirchner when she tried to pull her game about taxing it. Well, the price will go through the roof. And that's what's going to happen because so many people are so incredibly leveraged trying to suppress pricing for the reasons you talked about. They don't want the people to know. They want people to blindly go about their life, you know, and not know. And I'll say one more thing, and I'll take a break and let you talk again. Hard winter wheat is where our pasta comes from, okay? So, you know, why did pasta double in the grocery store when price of wheat in all the news is at the lows is because wheat's not just wheat. You know, there's hard red, there's hard white, there's soft red, there's soft white, you know, there's winter and there's summer, you know, and that market that's really affecting is hard winter wheat is where a lot of the pasta is consumed. It's like the primo crop, and also you know, the soft wheats are like what pasta is. I mean, not pasta, desserts. You know, so if you want to eat just dessert, you know, have at it, you know, but you're not going to get the good stuff.
Yeah, and speaking of that, cellulose filler is maybe where I want to jump into here, because as some of these commodities become more expensive on the food end, the supermarkets and producers want to continue to make it appear as if some goods are still there, everything's fully stocked, plenty of choices in the market. But what I've seen lately is the amount of cellulose filler has been increased in so many of the foods. So when you're talking about cookies and these kind of things, breads, things made from the exact same wheat, now they're putting in cellulose filler so they don't have to spend as much on the higher priced, high quality, high protein content wheat. And you start to see this throughout the entire supply chain, the amount of cellulose. And I highly encourage you to take a look at what they're trying to jack the food with to make it appear the exact same size without using the real base ingredient of wheat and using the filler. Up to 30% of a loaf of bread now can be cellulose.
They're doing us a favor, Dave. They're making us gluten-free without us knowing it.
Yeah, right. So think about that. When they run out of the filler, at some point, the human body can't accept that anymore. And they did an enormous amount of experiments, like how much a human body could consume in cellulose before it starts to starve, because there's just not the calorific intake in there. You know, there's only a limit as to how much they can continually fill up things with fillers. And then at that point, when that's surpassed and reached, then what? Then what? Because then the cat's out of the bag for sure. And there's nowhere to move from that point forward. Everybody's boxed back into a corner. Well, is there going to be some economic lockup at that point to try to explain away the food prices? Because as I was explaining the last couple of days, with the takeover of the largest server in Hong Kong, now at the university there, PolyU, where they police have been battling with the student protesters there, that one single facility there at the university has a throughput of 99% of all Hong Kong internet traffic. So Beijing had already talked about cutting off the internet when they went in to round everybody up. And when I say round everybody up, they're not talking a couple thousand agitators. They're talking about millions of people being arrested and shipped on trains back through China for trial. It's not going to, they're going to have to cut off the entire internet. And I was saying at the same time, if this truly comes to fruition, global shipping is going to stop on a dime because there's so much trans-shipping in Asia. And also, if they do turn off the internet, the amount of global finance on the overnight lending from the United States over to Asia and Asia over to, you know, say Europe, if they turn off the internet just in Hong Kong alone, that will disrupt the entire financial system as fast as you flip your light on in your house or off. You know, and when we talk about these disruptions, it would be the perfect excuse for rising food prices, at least in iteration 1.0, because everybody's going to go shopping this Christmas and holiday season, and they're going to get a rude awakening. I talked to Celeste yesterday, and she was saying that she bought a 2-pound roast, and it was something like $80 for a roast, and that is insane pricing. Now, when people go get their hams and they start to pick up these cuts of meat that they would only get once a year for this special thing around the dinner table for family and the holidays, they are going to be so shocked at how much it costs. But would it behoove the powers that be, or the central banking, or, you know, the governments in control right now, to have a reason why things would be so expensive? You know, if they would allow Hong Kong to flare off and let some disruption, not full disruption, in the supply chain in terms of global shipping, finance, etc., the manufacturing as well. Asia, everything's manufactured out in Asia. So if you can disrupt those through three things, or even one of them, you could explain away all the food price rises. And it wasn't nature, it was Hong Kong. And this is where I start to see all this, like they're blocking off the roads in Hong Kong, their curfew's set, and now they took over the internet. So I would do the same thing with an invasion of a country. You want to control the roads and the ports and all the infrastructure. You want to control the communications, specifically now with the internet, because everybody's communicating with Telegram and Line over there, so they're all encrypted apps, so you can, you know, see where police are moving or where the roadblocks are being set up and where they're trying to cordon off areas. So they got all the check marks of a true invasion of another country, just sitting here waiting, because the PLA has come out of the Hong Kong garrison twice already in the last week. So it seems that things are amplifying here. And could it be the ultimate excuse to explain away all these food rises as we're coming in? And another quirky thing is the timing. We're coming into the holidays right now, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and the rest of the world at New Year's is going to see the food prices spike, and they're going to all start to ask questions at the same time. Like, why does this thing cost 3 times as much as last year? Would it be a convenient excuse to explain away this year's price rises? And then what would they use for another excuse next year? Yemen, Gulf of Aden blocked, I don't know. But it's got to be a big excuse every single year now, in my opinion, to explain away all the food price rises at the end of the year when everybody comes in holiday season. Now, I don't know if that's too far-fetched to think like that, but that's where my mind is going, because there's going to have to be some explaining away of everything really in short order here, and especially next year. This year, maybe they could get by with it once.
Yeah, 10 years ago, Dave, I would have said that's Boulder Dash. But now I believe everything, because, I mean, just look what's happening with the impeachment hearings. I mean, these people are just making it up as they go along. So they're perfectly willing to tell, in our case, the American people, whatever they think they need to tell them to keep them mollified. And same with the food. My wife just, I got her a Slim Jim, and she we were talking, and she was reading the ingredients to me. She goes, "When did they start putting sugar in a Slim Jim?" And I'm like, "What?" And it's the number 2 ingredient.
Oh,
and
geez.
so I mean, when you just said that, just kind of blew me away. And we see it in the food prices here. The shrinkage and all stuff, but that's kind of all old news. What we're seeing now in America is the whole substitution conversation. And they're couching it all around saving the climate, right? So don't eat meat, learn to love bugs. I mean, they're substitute grand solar minimum climate change for grand solar minimum, but they're changing to do the total deflection, to confuse people. But they definitely want people to not eat meat, and they definitely want people to learn to get protein from unusual sources, because look, they know, the smart people know, when I say the smart people, the people who have inside information know the truth. They're simply lying as long as possible so that they can prepare as much as possible. And shame on them, because when this thing flips, I don't think they realize how fast the flip's going to be. And I always tell people, look, you need to have 6 months to a year put away with the food, so that you cannot be panicked when this happens. And it doesn't take much space, and it doesn't take much thinking, and you don't have to be some wacko prepper to do this. You could definitely prepare and eat well, and not be the one, especially what you have to really worry about is the first 4 to 6 weeks when this happens, because what they're going to do is the urban areas are going to be the area that's going to suffer the most, because the supply chains are going to be totally disrupted. If China goes offline because of Hong Kong, and you just saw what passed in the U.S. Senate today, unanimously, a sister bill to the House thing on Hong Kong. If that thing gets to the president's desk, and he has 2 choices. Well, he has 3 choices. He can sign it, he can ignore it, or he can veto it. Well, it's veto proof, number 1, so he'd be stupid to do it politically, because he's not a big China fan. He can sign it. He probably won't sign it because they think he may try to use it as leverage, or he can ignore it. In 60 days, it becomes law. Well, the Chinese will overreact to that, because Xi Jinping thinks he's some sort of visitor from heaven placed on earth to inform the masses of Chinese how to live, and he doesn't know how to say no. But if Hong Kong goes offline, we'll take China offline. China goes offline, the supply chains beyond just the food are going to go berserk. And not just us. Germany is absolutely dependent. After the U.S., Germany is dependent on England and China for its survival. And so this will become worldwide in a minute. And we're not even talking our favorite subject, climate. And that's happening in parallel, Dave. The climate thing is just on its way. And the other thing I read, so we can just keep shifting topics, which is amazing, is that when CO2 levels start dropping to certain levels, you and I were talking electromagnetism before we got on the show, but the CO2 levels start dropping, certain plants just simply die.
Stop growing. You don't want that, because think about this, CO2 levels, they keep telling us reduce the CO2, take it out of the atmosphere, reduce CO2. Extinction level event, does anybody, I'm going to put a question out here. Extinction level event, how many parts per million takes us to an extinction level? All life on this planet dies at 180 parts per million. At 280 parts per million, all plant life ceases to grow. We're barely at 400 and they want to reduce it down. I'm like, no way. We need to get as far away from that extinction level event marker where we're so close to. CO2 is some of the lowest it's been in millions of years on this planet, to the point where plant growth was affected. You can see they called about the greening of the earth because more CO2 in the atmosphere literally is visible through satellite changes over the last 30 years. So the more CO2, the better if it's plant food. And I'm not a fan of extinction level events. So the further we get away from the baseline of everything stops growing, the better for me. The way they politicize this, they've all wrapped it into the communism, the socialism. And if you don't agree, you're somehow a fascist because you don't agree with the new green initiatives. And I was just doing an article about Australia where they are actually planning in Victoria for power cuts this year because they destroyed so many coal-burning power plants and substituted with solar panel and wind, where they don't have a stable enough power supply for the businesses and factories to run. So businesses are thinking about leaving Victoria, going to other states where they might be able to get a constant power supply, and they're already trying to reroute power and think about how they can reroute power from other states. But if the others are drawing because it's extreme cold, extreme heat, heat going into the summer here, they just simply won't have the power. And then what? It's a travesty. They're sitting on billions of tons of coal, and they're going to sit there and not have enough power because what? You're communist. You don't agree with the Green Deal. I don't get it. We're in clown land here.
Yeah. Well, Chile, that's where all the riots came from. They went everything green. They didn't have enough power. They raised the price of power, and next thing you know, they had a riot on their hand. 1 million people in the street. Just this weekend, Iran raised the price of petrol.
Oh,
they burned down the central bank. In California, the PG&E, because they're so spiteful of being blamed for the fires because they spent no money in maintenance and basically were paying dividends and supporting the executive class, shut down millions of people, as in spite. And so California is becoming a third world country. All this stuff, they think people are just going to accept these things. And I always tell my family, they say, why aren't people in? I said, people care when they need to care. It doesn't matter to people till it matters to people. And then when it matters to people, they go all in. And politicians don't seem to understand that. They think they can control the narrative, but they don't realize how close to the edge everybody is, Dave. In Chile, all it took was, 10 or 15% increase in transport prices instead of
4 cents. Keep that in mind. 4 cents on the subway was part of the catalyst for that revolt down there. 4-cent increase.
Right, and same with Persia. I don't call it Iran; it's Persia. As soon as they get rid of the mullahs, we're going back to Persia.
Yeah, bring it on.
And they're the same way. And it didn't take much. They think people, that the elites think people are as wealthy as they are. Oh, you know what? It's only another $1 a pound for organic, grown in the attic chickens. Well, guess what? That means those people aren't eating chicken. They're eating vegetable soup because they can't afford that chicken. And that's what's happening around the world. We're the last to see it, and this is where all the propaganda gets produced out of it. But we're getting close to that point now, too, where it gets to the point, like in California, you don't make eggs in California anymore. We get them shipped in from Arizona and Nevada. Well, guess what? What if they shut the supply chain down? Well, people aren't eating eggs, And those are the kind of things that it doesn't dawn on people. The left likes to export out their pollution so they can live a virtuous life. Look, I don't want any of that dirty smelling. I want Teslas in my neighborhood. Yeah, you can produce the coal in Arizona. You bring it in, okay? You can have the solar power over there, but you bring it in here until, guess what? The power lines go down between Arizona and San Diego, and you get a 9-hour blackout like we had here one time. Because one power line went down. One power line, because they shut the nuke plant down in San Onofre. No backup. And you can't route it. It was impossible to route those lines back around to cover San Diego. So an entire county in California is like 6-7 million people, okay, and affected the southern half of Orange County. Well, that's what's happening in Northern California right now. Is that because the planning? That's how fragile these infrastructure systems are. That's what people don't understand about this whole thing of volatility. Things are looking good, so people, they just hide their head in the sand. They don't plan, they don't think. And that's, one of the clarion calls, I think, reason why you do what you do and I do what I do. I'm just yelling to people, look, the stock market's overvalued, okay? Commodities are undervalued. Shift your thinking. Shift your thinking. The governments out there, they want you to buy Tesla. They want you to buy Facebook. They want you to buy Google. Those, number one, those people support what they're doing. And number two, if you raise the price of commodities, it forces the government to not be prolific spenders. So they're always trying to push down those things, but those are the things that are going to be valuable over time. If you have a garage full of copper and a garage full of silver or a garage full of lead in 2 years versus a garage full of Yahoo or Microsoft stock certificates, okay, who do you think is going to be wealthier when this whole thing rolls over? It's the people who have things that you can touch and feel. But people, they can't grasp it because they can't see it.
I'd like to have a garage full of food. I think that would surpass everything. But you know what, Bob? You're going to have to make some sacrifices for this new world we're entering. It's a climate emergency, and you're just going to have to deal with the fact that you're going to have to sacrifice. And if you don't sacrifice, you are a fascist because you're not agreeing with the new policies that we're putting in. Everybody's got to sacrifice something. And this is the agenda that they're pushing forward, which I don't agree with. Like, why do we have to lower our lifestyles and reduce our lifestyles when China can go unchecked polluting into the air? India goes unchecked. An enormous amount of the world goes unchecked in their, march forward with mechanization and in the industrialization of their countries. Why is it, if it's such a climate emergency, we should have stopped all shipping traffic last year, 2 years ago. There should not have been a single vessel transit in the ocean bringing junk from one country to another at all. There should be no private planes. That's the first thing we need to phase out on a climate emergency is all private air travel ceases. I don't care if you're rich, ultra rich. You need to travel coach class with the rest of us and share an airplane with 350 people. I mean, it's a climate emergency, right? And see, this is the whole thing they're trying to get us into, this dichotomy of you need to make the sacrifice, but we won't. We can still fly private. And again, this whole thing about the supply chain, the riots are happening in India because of the onion pricing. So India has stopped all onion exports to try to stave off the political unrest in India right now. But Bangladesh imports 60% of all their internal consumption onions from India. So the same thing's happening there. Now, Bangladesh has flipped on a dime to the point where they have military in the warehouses checking everybody's onion stock that they don't overcharge, and they're guarding the warehouses where their onions are because there's only 40% there's 100% need, but there's only 40% to supply the entire need of the country for one of the most basic cooking ingredients for the diets in Bangladesh. And United Arab Emirates is another, UAE is another big India onion importer. I'll say that fast 3 times. But you can see the knock on the supply chain there, just how quickly things can come apart. And again, if prices are going to start falling apart, stock market's falling apart, we're going to have to pay for this somehow. And I have been since the very beginning of this saying we're going to use smart contracts for grain deliveries, because if you don't agree with your currency because it's failing or faltering, and I don't agree, and we're going to have to find a different mechanism. I would love to get your garage full of silver. I would love to trade you for your garage full of food. But in reality, it's going to be difficult to move these heavy items across state lines or country lines without some interference. But, crypto, I've been saying this. The tech is getting really good now to fill in those fields for execution clauses to make the next thing happen in the line of either delivery or the shipping documents. Rotterdam is really on that, using everything involved in the shipping mechanisms now is all on the blockchain. So you don't even need to send the paper envelopes anymore across the sea because it's in the blockchain, it's unalterable. So they don't even need the paper packs anymore. They're trying to reduce the amount of waste down there. Smart contracts for grain deliveries in the future. This is what I see. And I've seen that since the beginning. And here we are. You see crypto starting, everybody's talking about it. who was that, just started a new crypto fund just for Bitcoin for the top 1% earners on the planet. I don't think it was Novogratz. That was out yesterday's news. So what is it now that they're tailor-making a new investment class just for the ultra elite wealthy here on the planet? How much Bitcoin do you think they could scarf up if they tried to start buying every single last Satoshi out there worth of value? I mean, there's some big movements on the horizon here. And, you're better to talk about this. I'm trying to pick your brain now. Like, is it going to be the stock market goes down and then people start to switch over to crypto because they see the value holding in that or increasing, or the commodities prices are going to spike, so people are going to try to grab something to protect themselves that's rising with it? Or are they going to see, like I do, we're going to need another means or ways of exchange for value across continental rifts here? I don't know what the catalyst will be for that next run up because of something that's happening in the traditional markets that's going to flare off and then cause runs in the crypto and then the usage of these smart contracts.
Yeah. So what I tell people is that, gold and silver are vaccination against prolific spending from sovereign nations. Cryptocurrencies are the vaccination from the obliteration of a sovereign nation, and also for people to quickly and easily transfer wealth out of the country immediately, and they can walk across the border declaring nothing. And whenever you see agitation in a part of the world, like Turkey was one of the latest examples, Argentina got to a point where they were not letting people actually exchange pesos for Bitcoin. They quickly grasped that concept after they wouldn't let them take the dollar. People just went to the internet thing and just dumped their pesos and bought Bitcoin. And once you own Bitcoin, government can't seize it because there's nothing to seize. You literally have to be able to take it out of the people's brain, and I think that's when you're going to see Bitcoin really rocket when I would call a tier 2 nation goes offline. That's somewhere in Europe, like if Italy goes under. Italy and Spain are wobbly, right? Turkey's wobbly, and right now I think what's holding it back is, China. The people in China and Hong Kong are selling they're selling their Bitcoin because they're trying to raise capital because they're going bankrupt in those countries. But in 2021, as you know, the halving is happening, and basically inflation is going to seriously stop with Bitcoin. And I think then you're going to see demand without the commensurate supply. And then we're going to get the true test of the value of Bitcoin against the local currencies. People in the United States saying, oh, but the Bitcoin's not moving. I'm like, well, because you're in the US. Start comparing Bitcoin to the renminbi, Bitcoin to the Argentine peso, Bitcoin to the Turkish lira, Bitcoin to the Indian, not even sure what their currency is.
Rupee.
The Rumbi, yeah, and look, in India, to finish that thread, is not only they're trying to halt the export of food stuff, is that they're trying to confiscate the gold, and they've been extremely hostile to cryptocurrencies because they know their system is so incredibly corrupt that they don't want and can't afford an incorruptible currency that they can't manipulate. And so, but it's going to get to the point, just like with gold and silver, where they just can't control it anymore. The environment will just take over. And that's why I always tell people, look, just keep stacking and racking. And what we do at Trade Genius is that, when Bitcoin's running, hey, we're happy. When Bitcoin consolidates, we're looking to sell other coins against Bitcoin buy other coins against Bitcoin to lift the amount of Bitcoin we own. And we own some other cryptocurrencies, in terms of when you talk about smart contracts are going to be absolutely in vogue. That's just basically the new escrow in there. They're not going to allow the corrupt port officials to hold up a transfer payment because somebody bribed them that was taking delivery. Guess what? Your stuff left the port. It was agreed to that it was all there. It got there. The same stuff's there. Everything's still padlocked. That money's moving. Here's your stuff. That's a big game that's being played in Asia where they, you don't win a deal in Asia when you sign the contract. You win a deal in Asia when you get your money. And so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll find reasons to not accept so that they can grind the price. Well, I think where you're going to see, Dave, is those smart contracts, they're going to require an approving authority at where it's leaving the port, not when it gets to the new port.
Yeah, payment first will be the go.
Right. So your official in your country is going to be sitting at the port of Los Angeles saying, here's 2 million tons of wheat on this barge. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. Boom. It's padlocked. Boom. The smart contract's in effect. When it shows up in Shanghai, okay, then that contract, that shipmaster says, I arrived, the padlocks are good. Guess what? Boom, that money's gone. It left escrow, it left your account, and here's your stuff. You can screw around with the ship if you want, but I sold you grain, I'm getting paid. Because that's the level of trust that won't be required, that when things get push come to shove, people aren't going to trust that somebody's going to go through a deal. And those smart contracts are going to be the way it's going to be, because you can't move stuff around. With a smart contract, is you can't bribe a banker, you can't bribe anybody, because you have 15,000 nodes or somewhat that says it's good to go. And that's what's going to happen. So cryptos are going to be just fine. What you have to do is be a trader until we get this next push higher. And look, when rich people start doing this, and we're going to start having options contracts next year in Bitcoin, there's commercial interest in this. People know the dollar is last man standing. You and I talked about, so what, the U.S. has all the gold in the world. We're not letting any of that gold leave the country, okay? So it's going to have to be some other way of doing it. The reason why we got off the gold standard in the first place is because France showed up and said, I want my gold. I don't want your treasuries. I want your gold. And Nixon said, no problem. We're off the gold standard. And so that's what's going to happen again. Gold is great, but gold's never going to leave the country. So you're going to need a medium that's going to be trusted beyond the commodity. And that's going to be some sort of gold-backed crypto. And we're starting to see those concepts starting to come to fore now too, Dave.
Yeah, I think that's a new movement forward, and especially digital finance, where they have, like DAI, something like this, where you can come out of your gains into something with a stable coin that's running as an autonomous contract outside government control as well, where they can't shut it down. Because I've had a fair few people talk to me about exchange problems, and we've seen it since the beginning of how many exchanges have gone up, how much people have lost. Now, I want to talk about capital controls for a second, because you hit on India there for a second. They made all the high denomination notes illegal in India, and they confiscated all those, and you only had a certain amount of time to go into the banks to turn them in. Now, I was just traveling over in London and down to Totnes, and I did a 3-city speaking tour about the grand solar minimum. I presented in London, and then I did a couple other cities down there. The thing that I found, because once I was leaving, I had a bunch of change, and I had all these 20s and whatnot in pound notes. So I wanted to change them into 100-pound or something like this. And they told me, we don't use 100-pound notes anymore. And I said, awesome. How about some 50-pound notes? And they go, oh, those are rarely used anymore. And I said, what? A 50-pound note is difficult to get? They've done the same thing that India did. They relegated everybody to the super, super, super small money. Everybody's running around with a bunch of 20-pound notes. 50s are considered like wow, you got a 50. That is strange. And using euros, the same thing. There's no more 200 euro notes. Those are gone. The 500 euro, out of circulation. Again, they got everybody back down. 50s are common in euros, a little bit higher denomination than the pounds. But try to go find and cash in 100 euro. They look at you like you got 6 heads over there for 100 euros. Like, we don't have change for that. It's too big of a note. Everybody's running around with like micro change everywhere down there. It's startling how, how difficult it is to get larger denomination notes, especially to travel with. And see, that was the whole thing is I didn't want a whole stack of 20s like this big of pounds. I want that thing locked into a couple hundreds where I can walk through and it's real thin in the money belt. Not possible. Hundreds don't exist anymore. I'm shocked. So we got the same capital controls. And again, Litecoin is going to be halving here along with the Bitcoin. Litecoin's going to have first, then we got the Bitcoin halving. And again, everything I've done with this study through history, the food prices during the Maunder minimum spiked to 7x. And then they came back down again. So far, Bob and I, we've been talking about 1.7x or doubling of food prices, maybe tripling on a wild time. But imagine if it really went like it did across the capitals of Europe in 1680 when everything went up 7x. How do you think our economies would be able to handle that? Because there's way more people in the world right now than there were in 1680 or 1640, 1650. There were less than 1 billion people at that time. Now we have almost 8 billion people. And they're all going to be scrapping for food at the same time. So perhaps this 7x would be a far low number. Perhaps we're going to get to 49x on the food pricing or something exponential because the population of our planet compared to those prices is exponential and our food availability and grow belts and grow zones are shifting to shrink that availability. So I don't know what you think about where the food prices could go. And again, it's all about the fiat currency devaluing because gold, silver, and crypto are going to hold the value while everything else around it just inflates up. So a 7x or a 49x increase in your food price, if you were holding something else of value, it really might not matter to you because that's just the paper that's hyperinflating away for some of these prices. Take a good look at Zimbabwe. So where do you think we could hit on the food pricing and how do we protect ourselves?
Well, yeah, I mean, the way I look at that is that it's hard for me to imagine anything more than what's happened historically. That's how you look at trading. You can't perceive something beyond what has already occurred. So you have to use that as a baseline. And so the things that I look at from like a positive standpoint, I said, okay, what do we have now that we didn't have in 1680? So we have better food storage. We have better food management. We have better fertilizer, we have better transportation, and we have the ability to link food distribution globally. So I said, so that's a good guy. On the bad guy standpoint, as you have to think about is the when the trust falls, China. If China suffers, the United States probably will export some of its excess. But if the U.S. failed, China will not export anything to the U.S. So, you have to start thinking in terms of nations going to ground. And so that I take that off, number one. And number two is that nations that aren't on the dollar standard are going to suffer at that higher end of the X range. Okay. So I'm still looking at 5 to 7X, Dave. Okay, because I think we're better at, okay, you know what, France, you can't grow wheat this year, but you know what, we're pretty confident you can probably get barley out of the ground, right? Or we're starting to see this sprouts technology come to fruition where, and you're starting to see it in some of the nations that have what I would call poor pasture, be able to take sprouts and grow them in 7 days inside of an encased warehouse and be able to feed their animals. So you might start seeing where, hey, you know what, it doesn't make any sense to me, at this price to do that with sprouts, but at this price, it makes sense for me to build these warehouses and to feed that way. So I think some of those things will cap, but I think we're going to see large parts of the world suffer enormously. And I'm going to talk China for a second because I think China's going to be an interesting case study on how well this is going to go. China built the Belt and Road to be able basically to forestall the last food famine they had. So they're buying up as much ag land in China as they can. They're bribing every country along their rail route, through Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan and the reason why they're suppressing the Uyghurs is because they want to make sure they know that food's coming through there. And the last thing they want to have is Islamic militants destroying their ability to get food into mainland China. So it's very strategic on their part. Evil, but strategic. And
could I toss in a caveat there, Bob?
Sure.
There's a 2,000-year rain cycle repeating in there, and what they're finding is the massive floods. They're constructing new dams all across in Xinjiang to capture all the extra water to start to irrigate new zones. That if you look back in the previous dynasties in the Warring States period, go back to like 600 AD or even further back, right along the Silk Road trading, those were forests in what is now desert, pasture lands, orchards, running rivers, monasteries, cities that have been long abandoned that are covered by sand. But those rainfall patterns are coming back to the same area. So add in the caveat of controlling the food supply, because they're not going to want to have to share it with the people who are indigenous that live there, because food's going to be so valuable that they're setting up new grow zone there along with the transit point. And that was my extra bit there.
Yeah, and they're probably going to need it, because in Africa, the local population will not easily acquiesce to all their food leaving their countries. And I have a neighbor of mine that goes to Namibia every year. He spends months there. He's does a lot of certification for people. A lot of the German tourists that come down and do parachuting, paragliding, and things of that nature. And I asked him, I said, are the Chinese in Namibia? He goes, yeah, they're all over. And he said they keep to themselves. They said wildlife from 5 miles around any Chinese settlement is gone, because they don't feed their people. They make them go out and hunt their own food. And he said they don't hire any of the locals. Anything they grow or they manufacture goes right back to China. So China imports their own labor, and they're basically strip mining these countries, and they just pay off the elites. Well, when push comes to shove, I think China's going to lose the ability to control Asia, and I mean Africa. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see how China deals with that. At the same time, you're looking at, I think Europe's going to go offline too. Europe has zero ability to produce enough food for themselves. I think the French are the closest, ironically, and so they're going to be looking to Africa. The French and the Germans are big into sub-Saharan Africa, trying to create grow zones themselves. Well, all that stuff's in areas in which they used to colonize, so there's no love lost there. So I'm looking. I think the Eurasian landmass is going to be an interesting animal, and Russia's just simply going to go offline. They're just not going to be able to grow anything. And so, I think we're blessed living in America, because we have this entire north to south to kind of shift, and it's relatively safe. I laugh at people. I said, hey, Southwest of the United States might be the safest place to be in this grand solar minimum, because we're going to push the temperate belts down, and we're going to see more rain. When people think we're going to go dry, I think we're going to become wetter, and we're seeing it. We're getting rain now, and we're getting 2 years ago we had like copious amounts of rain, and I think those grow zones, as they push in, are going to cause, I think, Eurasia to have big issues, and I think Africa is not going to be open to all their food being exported, and whole sub-Saharan Africa is going to go green, and they're going to find a hard bargain with you. You watch, Europe is going to, you talk about the migrants going from Africa to Europe, you're going to see the migration from Europe into Africa for people to be able to survive. Because you look at Algeria, I'm sure you talked about it in your show this last couple of weeks. I mean, the place looks like California Sierras, Record
Algeria, snowfall again with that Medicaid that came in there, yeah.
And Saudi Arabia again, and so, yeah, it's going to be really interesting. But if food prices are going to go up, people have zero ability, Dave, to handle it. And the central banks can't keep printing currency and try to import food with it, because it's not going to be accepted. And I don't know if we talked about when we began this, but that's what's going to end the central banks. It's not going to be hyperinflation from too much printing. It's going to be hyperinflation because they can't afford to pay to import the food. And then it's lights out for central banks. And then the reset happens, and who knows the consequences of it. It's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, and the desert Southwest there, where you referenced, that's a 4,000-year rain cycle called the North American monsoon that is now shifting. And like generally, I'm going to bring you all the way back to the beginning when you were talking about the arc storms that are coming in. You got the first set of storms this week, another set, and then a third set out there. Well, NOAA has increased the arc storm ferocity from a 5 to a 5+. So they also know that they did this about 2 years ago, that there's going to be more heavier, intense storms coming. So instead of having something that's so far out the range that it doesn't fit a category, they've created a new category for intensifying arc storms. But the interesting thing is, instead of them coming directly west-east like they normally do, you see a lot more precipitation coming up from Baja, straight slamming right into Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona there. That's that North American monsoon shift. And that is going to continue to get wetter and wetter and wetter and soak that desert area. And again, if you don't want those fighters and resistance force down in North Africa, mainly males have left that area. So they get 4 million men out of that area so far through unchecked immigration. Seems like a strange thing, and a lot of the problems that it's causing throughout parts of the world where it's becoming almost too many migrants in a certain place where they're outnumbering the local residents now of certain countries. That's by design. It's to get all those foreign fighters. Those guys in Northern Africa would resist, and they are ferocious, and I give them respect for what kind of fighters they are. But the resistance force has been exited out of there so far, 4 million men. That's twice as big as China's army have left through immigration out of the Northern African new emerging grow zones. They're never going to come back. So when you look at that, it makes sense with the immigration now. So when you take a look at immigration in a completely different way of depopulating resistance out of a new emerging grow zone, it's a brilliant chess move on the board, a little bit nefarious, like you said. But you got China now. Then here's where it comes. China's there, and the EU wants to be in there where their own old Roman grain growing belts are. So you got two powerhouses down there fighting for the same new emerging grow zones. Plus, the locals probably want to come back. So we're going to get a whole contentious issue of who's going to try to own that land down there. And Libya is the wild card with that primary water source oozing out of the earth. They could use that for an enormous amount of irrigation across Libya. And then with the increasing rainfall, wow, you could, and I did the numbers crunching on that. If they actually do just North Africa, forget the sub-Saharan part, we could push over into Sudan and Chad and include that if we want to, all the way down into Mauritania, fine. That would be more than all of North America and Canada grows for grains. You have to realize that would be a substitute for all of North American grain production, because they would have multiple seasons because it's continuously warm, continuously sunny. It would be like the best growing conditions of Southern California or the best of growing conditions in Arizona, which used to be a breadbasket about 100 years ago. They even used to raise ostriches there. So think about the possibility of how much food could be abundantly produced if they got the water under control out of Libya with its water source plus the above ground rain increasing. We might think of the scarcity and grow zones going offline, but there's going to be a substitute in so many places. Like look at Yemen and Oman. Those are coming on as new grow zones. And it just never stops. Look where the politics on our planet is taking place, and you'll see exactly where the new grow zones are emerging. Now I'm starting to take my research in an entirely different direction here.
Yeah, look, don't ever confuse people who are listening. Don't think politicians and bureaucrats are stupid. They are not. They're just nefarious, and they know what's going on. They're head faking people. So they know exactly what's happening with the climate changing. They just want you to not be prepared until they can get in front of you. And I agree with you. I would say I'm gloom, not doom, because I think there's going to be this overlap of unpreparedness. But those zones will have to be re-domesticated, if you will, in terms of being able to be effective. It's one thing to have Yemen be a great breadbasket, but if they're constantly at war, it does nobody any good. And the same with the the Northern African states. They're fairly hostile to the West for many good reasons, because they were subject to colonialism, and so those areas are going to have to all be renegotiated, and so you're going to have some issues, and there'll be war there. I mean, look, if the Europeans are starving, they're going to rediscover their armies, okay, and they're a lot closer than China, so it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. And in the United States, I think we're just going to see this gliding back and forth. I joke with people all the time. I say northern western Mexico, southwest United States. I said, people say, you're going to move because of climate change. I said, no, the climate change is moving to me. And this is going to be an ideal area. And I agree with you. I've been telling people for years, I said, watch where the hurricanes are hitting every year. They're gliding up the Baja Peninsula, and they're curving in more into Arizona. And I said, as this thing happens, you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, look at this late storm we're having. A November hurricane out of Baja's Eastern Pacific, unheard of. It didn't have the punch, but that moisture is meeting winter cold mass. It's just going to rinse out right over SoCal. Beautiful thing. So it's going to be fun. And Dave, I'm going to have to scoot off on this, but I definitely want to talk more. I mean, this is some incredible stuff. I know we didn't get into trading, we didn't get into trade genius and all that stuff. Maybe we can do an add on to this maybe in a couple of weeks. But this stuff's important stuff, people. Don't let the surface answer satisfy you. You have to go deeper, and you have to trust what you're seeing here. The grand solar minimum is driving everything you're seeing in politics. You just aren't told that. These people know what's going on. The people in the NSA and the CIA, the Chinese Secret Service, the German Secret Service, these people all know what's happening. They're all preparing. But they don't want to scare their populations. And what a great way to do it is totally head fake them. Give them a 180 on this stuff until it's too late. And they got in front of this thing. If they told people now in 6 years there may not be enough food to eat, can you just imagine?
The society would fall apart today, not in 6 years.
Yeah, so I leave you with that thought. So the government, who knows, they may be giving us a backhanded compliment by not telling us, but just don't believe them, and you need to prepare. And maybe, Dave, we can talk next time. Let's talk some solutions, because there's some really incredible technology that's coming out that even in your own homes and your own yards, you could produce 20 or 30% of what you need to eat without being a farmer. And that all that takes the load off of everything. And so there's always hope. I'm an optimist. I see the world the way it is, but I'm always preparing to make sure that either I can protect or profit from it. Basically the heart of a trader. So I'll leave you with that, Dave, and thanks so much for giving me time for us to talk. It's been too long, and we got to do this again soon.
Yeah, Bob Kudla here, tradelikeagenius.com. And my last parting thought is, this is the greatest opportunity in human history. There's more people on the planet now that are going to need more services, more goods, more ideas, and more solutions as we move through this transition period here. And talking about indoor vertical farming, I believe this is going to be a gigantic new industry that's going to come out to try to retrofit buildings, homes, just like you're talking about. Could be sprouts. I have the vertical tubes in my back growing as well. We have 108 different holes coming out of the tubes to do different types of lettuces, different types of superfoods, Moringa oleifera, Guinura, goji. There's like an enormous amount of things you can grow. But most people don't have the time, effort, but there's an opportunity. So what's your skill set that can blend in with this transition period? And, do take a look at the news feed, because it gives you a lot of indication on where the most likelihood for change in agriculture is happening or will happen on the planet. Anyway, Bob, thanks for your time. I learned a lot today talking to you about a few ideas I had. I had some personal questions in our interview, so thanks for dropping in the nuggets there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. And Bob and myself will be back right around the holiday time, and we'll be sharing a bottle of wine online here while we talk at our next interview. Until then, see you next video.
Prost.
Prost! I'm going to Czech Republic here. And I've been speaking with Bob Kudla from TradeLikeAGenius.com. Learn to make money every day with the pros. Use the promo code Black Friday for 50% off non-bundled items.